If you asked Theodore Roosevelt to describe his life, he would have said that his life was bully. Bully meant cool back in 1900. Now look at this. This man loved sports. He practiced hiking, sports, judo, karate, boxing, swimming, sailing, hiking, mountain climbing. And the man was a dynamo. He just wouldn't stop. He was a learned man. He wrote several books. He learned 6 different languages. He knew zoology, naturalist. He was environmentalist. He bought cattle ranches. I mean, the guy was just active, active, active. And he ran his presidency with the force of his personality. Let's observe Theodore Roosevelt and wonder what was it that drove this man. This man didn't just have drive, he was driven. So let's talk about him. Theodore Roosevelt was born in 1858 to a very well-to-do New York family. He was born with very bad asthma and he was very nearsighted. His parents would walk him up and down the hallways or give him horse and buggy rides to open up his lungs. His father would actually give him cigars thinking it would help. It only made Teddy sick. Now, Theodore had a childhood friend named Edith Caro. They were very, very close, so much so that everybody thought they would grow up and get married. Well, it seemed like they were kind of in love when they were in their youth, but they had a falling out. Nobody knows what happened, but there was a dispute. Theodore Roosevelt went to Harvard. While he was there, his father died. He was very broken-hearted, but he met Alice Lee, 17 years old. He fell madly in love with her. But she liked him as a friend, and she told him so. He was in the friend zone, a place that few men have ever escaped from. But Roosevelt persisted and told someone, "She won't have me, but I'll have her." This seems like stalker material, but he must have done something right, because they got married in 1880. Even after the wedding, Roosevelt would write her love letters. He said that no man was worthy of her, that she was his purest queen. He adored her. He became a New York assemblyman. Alice got pregnant. Around that time, he was out west, and he bought himself a cattle ranch, became himself a little bit of a cowboy. Then he got a telegram saying that Alice had given birth to a baby girl. Theodore Roosevelt was ecstatic, and he began packing. But then he got a second telegram that said that his mother was dying. Now he began packing with urgency. Believe it or not, he got a third telegram. His wife was dying. How was this possible? Well, Roosevelt's mother had typhoid fever. As for Alice, she had a kidney ailment that doctors apparently did not detect because of her pregnancy. Roosevelt arrived the very next day to a very solemn home. The foreboding weight of death was everywhere. In one room was his dying mother. In the other room, his dying wife. In still another room, his baby daughter named Alice, after her mother. She was 1 day old. Theodore Roosevelt took turns sitting in one room and then the other. His mother passed away first. After quick funeral arrangements were made, he went to sit with his wife, and hours later, she died in his arms. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day, their 4th wedding anniversary. Alice was 22, he was 26. Theodore went to his diary and marked February 14th with an X and wrote, "The light went out of my life forever." After the funeral, he handed baby Alice to his sister's care and went back to the cattle ranch. In the frontier, he would sit on his horse, alone. He mourned. Periodically, he'd visit his daughter, but finally, after 2 years, he left the ranch, picked up little Alice, and went home. What brought him back was Edith Caro, his childhood friend. They had reconnected, reconciled, and soon afterward, they got married. She helped him raise little Alice, and they had 5 children of their own. They moved to Oyster Bay, New York, to his estate named Sagamore Hill. Now, through his connections, this well-educated Harvard graduate, Theodore Roosevelt, became police commissioner of New York. Well, he didn't sit around on that cushy little job. No, he went out there in the middle of the night to see if he could catch police officers that were asleep on their watch. Besides that, he fought corruption. And he brought innovations, for example, the telephone. Believe it or not, there were no telephones in the police stations at the time. He also formed what they called the Police Bicycle Patrol. He was very, very active. President McKinley named him Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he loved his job. But when the Spanish-American War broke out, he resigned his post, formed a regiment called the Rough Riders. When they arrived in Cuba, one of his horses drowned. Then came the decisive Battle of San Juan Hill, where Theodore Roosevelt led his Rough Riders uphill in an almost suicidal attack where he lost many men. Now, many criticize this as bloodlust or perhaps vainglorious ego. Whatever the case may be, he became a war hero. His career skyrocketed and he became the governor of New York, but the political machine thought they could control Theodore Roosevelt. Nobody controls Roosevelt. He went after them with a vengeance and fought corruption. Shortly afterwards, he was named Vice President of the United States, a job that he hated. He had nothing to do. But lo and behold, President McKinley got shot, and at 42 years old, Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest president of the United States. So, Theodore Roosevelt moves to the White House with his wife Edith and his 6 children. Mischief abounds. Ponies, dogs, they walk on the White House lawn. Alice, the oldest, would smoke and play poker in public. Well, Roosevelt said, I could run the country or I can control my daughter Alice, but I can't possibly do both. Roosevelt was once described as a big 6-year-old. He would play with the kids. When his wife was out, he would hang them outside the 3rd-story window, hang it onto a bedsheet. Crazy stuff. Now, Roosevelt invited black leader Booker T. Washington to the White House, and the South attacked him viciously, saying all sorts of slanderous things in the newspaper. While Roosevelt kind of brushed that aside, but he never invited Booker T. Washington to the White House again. I really wish that progressive Theodore Roosevelt had done more for civil rights, but unfortunately, he didn't. Now, the upper class, the rich, held enormous power. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Morgans. It was just ridiculous. What could I say? The poor, however, the poor were suffering. I mean, there was no minimum wage at the time. Children as young as 6 years old were working in the coal mines and sweatshops. Everybody worked 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. There were no retirement benefits, no unemployment, no Social Security. You worked until you saved enough money to retire, or you worked until you died. And a male teacher would make $900 a year, which is about $17,000 today. A factory worker would make between $100 to $200 a year. Imagine making $200 a year, that's about $16 a month. So, while many people made $16 a month, rich steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, when he retired, he gave himself a pension of $40,000 a day. Obviously, there was a wage gap. 3 rich fat cats, J.P. Morgan, E.H. Harrison, and James Hill, decided to merge their monies together and create one huge monopoly on the railroads. Roosevelt stepped in. He told J.P. Morgan that they were violating the Antitrust Act, and he stopped the monopoly. They sued, they lost, and Roosevelt's career as a trust buster had begun. You see, Roosevelt did believe in capitalism. He wanted people to make money, but he was also against the inequality that existed. The vast wage gap is what he was against. And he fought and he fought and he busted many, many monopolies that were called trust back then. Thus, his nickname, the Trust Buster. Now, the only way to get from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean was going all the way around South America. So, of course, Roosevelt was interested in the Panama Canal. Now, at the time, Panama was actually a province that belonged to Colombia. Roosevelt negotiated with the Colombians, could not come to an agreement with them, and furious, he decided to help some rebels that were in Colombia. The rebels broke away from the country and formed their own country, Panama. Now, many complained and called this Yankee imperialism, abuse of power, but Roosevelt was just getting started. He cited the Monroe Doctrine and added the Roosevelt Corollary, stating that the U.S. had the right to intervene and stabilize the affairs of the countries of the Caribbean and Central America. If they could not pay their debts, the United States would intervene. This began the Banana Wars, decades of intervention and occupation of many countries, such as Haiti, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua. It may have helped stabilize the region, but only for American interest. And many state that it only really enriched companies such as Standard Oil and the American Fruit Company. So, Theodore Roosevelt began work on the Panama Canal. It would take about 10 years, and in today's currency, about $8 billion. 46 miles of canal, different locks that were set in. It was a marvel of today's engineering. Now, over 5,000 workers died building the Panama Canal. Many died of dengue, malaria, yellow fever, dynamite mistakes, derailments. It was a horrible, horrible time. Now, a Dr. William Gorgas discovered that yellow fever and malaria was caused by mosquitoes. You fight the mosquito, you eradicate the disease. One positive, revolutionary step that took place because of the building of the Panama Canal. Well, the Panama Canal was built. The U.S. owned it. In 1977, Jimmy Carter signed the accord to pass the canal over to Panama's hands in 1999, and so it was done. As Roosevelt would say, his first term in office was bully. But wait till you see the second one. But that's coming up in our next video. In the meantime, this is Cool Talk. Comments below, or better yet, subscribe.